Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session on building power in the states for reproductive freedom. My name is Ryan Stitzline, and I'm the National Political Director at NARAL Pro-Choice America, and I am so excited to be here with you all today and honored to moderate this important discussion. Now, despite a clear mandate from voters to protect the legal right to abortion, state lawmakers hostile to reproductive freedom have ramped up their blatantly unconstitutional attacks on abortion access in hopes of overturning Roe versus Wade. So far in 2021, anti-choice state lawmakers have already introduced, advanced, or passed more than 315 bills attacking abortion access. In 2021, over 90 restrictions on abortion access have been enacted at the state level, making this the worst year for attacks on abortion since Roe versus Wade was decided. Restrictions and bans on abortion care block or push access out of reach for many, and these burdens disproportionately fall on those already facing the most significant barriers to accessing care due to systemic racism and inequities, including Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian American, and Pacific Islanders, and other people of color, those working to make ends meet, members of the LGBTQ community, immigrants, young people, those living in rural communities, and people with disabilities. With the Supreme Court gearing up to hear Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization and Roe under dire attack, it's more important than ever to build power at the state level to protect and advance our reproductive freedom. That's why I'm thrilled to be joined today by three remarkable leaders in the fight for reproductive freedom, serving on the front lines in their state legislatures. Assemblywoman Wendy Carrillo represents California's 51st State Assembly District, encompassing East Los Angeles, Northeast LA, and the neighborhoods of El Sereno, Echo Park, Lincoln Heights, Chinatown, and parts of Silver Lake. She is the first Latina to represent her district. Assemblywoman Carrillo immigrated to the United States during El Salvador's Civil War and was an undocumented child until the age of 13. She became an American citizen at 21 and was the first in her family to vote. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Communications from California State University, LA, and Master's in Journalism and Political Science from the University of Southern California. Prior to being elected in December 2017, Assemblywoman Carrillo was a broadcast journalist and managed public affairs for the Service Employee International Union Local that represents 350,000 California long-term care workers. Assemblywoman Carrillo serves as chair of Budget Subcommittee Number 4 on State Administration, is chair of the Select Committee on Young Girls and Women of Color, and serves on the Appropriations, Health, Utilities and Energy, and Privacy and Consumer Protections Committees. Representative Jasmine Clark represents Georgia State House District 108. First elected in 2018, Representative Clark's legislative agenda has been focused on education, voting rights, reproductive rights, environmental protection, common sense gun reform, criminal justice, and healthcare. During her first term, she was the primary sponsor of HB 133, which seeks medically accurate sex education that includes accurate information regarding HIV prevention. She was also a top sponsor of dozens of bills that reflect constituent issues and concerns, her legislative agenda, as well as her core values. In the 2021-2022 session, Representative Clark plans to continue the work of being a science voice in the Georgia State Legislature and an advocate and voice for her constituency in House District 108. She also serves as the vice chair of the Gwinnett State House Delegation and as the secretary on the executive board of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus. And finally, Senator Melanie Scheibel was first elected to the Nevada State Senate in November of 2018 to represent the 9th Legislative District in Las Vegas. Senator Scheibel is a NARAL-endorsed candidate who has been a key ally in advancing reproductive freedom in Nevada. Her notable accomplishments include being a co-sponsor of the 2019 Nevada law repealing criminal penalties for abortion and the chief sponsor of the 2021 law that ensures survivors of sexual assault are offered emergency contraception in emergency rooms. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. And I'd like to start by having each of you tell us a little bit about yourself and why it is so important for you to be a reproductive freedom champion. Assemblywoman Carrillo, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you all and great to be amongst great company. for women's reproductive health care and really reproductive health care for all people. For me, it's a very basic conversation about equality and rights. And I'm coming to you live from my mother's kitchen. So yes, that is a panaderia, very Latino household calendar. And I think I bring that up because I think as immigrant women, as women of color, as first generation Americans, there is a responsibility that we all have to ensure that access to health care and access to reproductive freedom continues to be at the forefront of all conversations towards equity. I was born in the country of El Salvador. El Salvador is one of 3 nations around the world in which if a woman has a natural miscarriage, the country actually incarcerates women. And there's been a lot of advocacy and human rights work done around this issue in El Salvador. California is the second largest home to Salvadorians outside of the country. And so being a progressive, being a woman, being an immigrant experiences changes. And so I bring that to the table in conversations that we have had in the legislature, in international trips that we have done through the Assembly, through the Speaker's office, and through the Governor Newsom. First international trip when he was elected was to El Salvador to look at the issues related to migration to the U.S. from El Salvador and Guatemala and Nicaragua and other places. And reproductive freedom is one of those reasons why women are migrating. And so we have done a lot of work around that, and we will continue to do so. In fact, one of the larger pieces of legislation that I've been carrying for the last few years that we got done this year through the budget process has been creating the forced sterilization compensation fund, in which up until 2010 in California, women were being unknowingly sterilized in California institutions and prisons. And we have been fighting this fight for a long time. And we finally got it through and done through the budget. And we're still moving the piece of legislation forward to ensure that all survivors of forced sterilization in the state of California, which led, unfortunately, in awful eugenics laws across the country, and unfortunately even set the platform in which Hitler used eugenics during World War II, based on California legislation. So there's been a lot of wrongs, a lot of injustice, and a lot of work that we get to continue to move forward. And I'll talk a little bit more of that, when we get into more of the discussion.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And Representative Clark.
Thank you so much. So as you said, my name is State Representative Jasmine Clark, and I am here in Georgia, and one of the most diverse counties in the state, and arguably probably in the Southeast. I mean, we have a beautiful tapestry of cultures and demographics, races, ethnicities, traditions. It's just an amazing place to live. And, when I decided to run for office, I came to politics by way of a pretty untraditional route. I'm in science. I am a microbiologist that decided to take my talents to our state capital. And so when it comes to reproductive rights, I think I come at this from the lens that I come at a lot of things. I come at it from a science lens. I understand, number one, that reproductive health is health. Our bodies are amazing, and our bodies are intricately interwoven in a way that you don't get to separate different parts of the body as if they are not working alongside other parts of the body. Now, I know insurance companies would disagree with me on that, but the truth is that's just not how the body works. So when we talk about reproductive rights and reproductive justice and reproductive freedom and reproductive health, we are just talking about health, freedom, justice, and rights. These are things that are really important to us as Americans. And so reproductive health, justice, freedom, and rights should be just as important to us. I also believe that education is vitally important, as making informed decisions is probably one of the most empowering things that a person can do. And so I am a lecturer. I teach microbiology and anatomy and physiology in my full-time job, But I also take it upon myself when I am serving in my state legislature to bring that education and to educate my colleagues as much as I can about the ramifications of the bills that they put forth. Now, I'm in Georgia. I'm in the South. I'm in the Bible Belt. This is an uphill battle that I pretty much have to fight every single day that I am in the legislature. And even when it feels like we're getting, quote, a break because they start focusing on other culture wars or other extreme legislation, they still find a way to sneak in a way to try to strip women of their bodily autonomy or strip people of their reproductive rights. And so this is why I have sponsored things like the sex education bill, because again, information and education is power, and I want to make sure that our youth are coming up being informed so that they can make good decisions, so they can understand things like consent. They can understand exactly what's going on with their bodies. Let's treat sex education the way we treat any other science, where we really want to make sure that people have the information so they can use that information in their lives. And so I appreciate being a part of today's panel and being joined by these amazing panelists. And thank you so much for having me today.
Well, thank you. And we'll say last but certainly not least, we'll go to Senator Scheibel.
Well, thank you so much. I'm also really privileged to be here and in great company. I wish we had a microbiologist in our legislature. We do have several doctors, and they're incredibly helpful to us during our discussions about reproductive freedom and reproductive rights. And I wish that we had more scientists working with us in the legislature. Here in Nevada, we have a bare bones operation. We only meet every other year for 120 days. So I just came back from our 2021 legislative session. It ended on May 31st, and we won't go back until February of 2023. So in the interim, we spend a lot of time talking to people, talking to communities, learning about what's going on in Nevada, and trying to gear up to make the best of those 120 days when they come back around. And one of the first things that I've learned in these first two sessions is that reproductive health conversations are never going to end. This is not going away because we have bodies, and when we die, more people will be born who also have bodies with some of the same features and some different features. And so for as long as the human race continues to govern itself, we're always going to be talking about what we're allowed to do with our bodies and what we're not allowed to do with our bodies. And as science progresses and we develop new ways of taking care of our bodies, we're going to have new conversations about what is ethical, what is unethical, what is scientifically sound and what is not. And frankly, those conversations also bring out a lot of noise, because people who don't value women's autonomy and don't value individual freedoms and rights, although they may belong to a party that says that they do, they tend to come out of the woodwork to exploit these people's identities in order to pit people against each other. And so my focus in reproductive freedom and in reproductive justice has been in two main areas, one of them being for young people. I was I even turned 30. And so I have been dealing with utilizing birth control throughout my service in the legislature, which I think is something that people don't always talk about and don't always want to talk about. But I feel lucky to have a platform where I can do that and not face the repercussions that other women do, that teenagers might face from their parents, that younger leaders might face in other jobs. So I try to use that platform to ensure that conversations are happening and that they are happening in ways that are productive and accurate. And the other place that I focused a lot of my attention is on the LGBTQ community. And especially gender diverse people. I'm a member of the LGBTQ community. I'm bi, and I am working very hard to get a trans person elected to the Nevada legislature, and it will happen. But until then, I find myself in this position a lot of reminding my colleagues that when we talk about reproductive freedom, we're not just talking about having a family and having it when you want one, but we're talking about people taking, hormone replacement therapy. We're talking about gender diverse people utilizing an IUD to stop their period to deal with body dysmorphia. We're talking about people having the autonomy to choose whether or not they'll ever be able to reproduce using their internal organs or not. We're talking about people who are making decisions about their own bodies, and they do often have to do with reproductive organs because our idea of sex and gender is so centered in our reproductive systems, which is a whole nother conversation. But, as that conversation is ongoing about what it means to be a woman or to be a man or to be a person, I think it's important that everybody continue to have access to the healthcare that they need in order to live their life in a way that's productive and in the way that they can thrive.
Well, thank you so much. And I particularly loved hearing each of you talk about, how your unique life experiences really are an asset and how they've helped shape the way that you legislate in your individual states. And now we have some questions specific to your states. So Senator Scheibel, we'll start with you this time. Nevada is the first state in the nation with a majority female pro-reproductive freedom legislature. I'd love if you could tell us how this has benefited your ability to govern and how organizations like NARAL have supported your work.
Being part of the first female legislature has been truly incredible. And I wish that my colleagues here can one day also experience being part of a female majority, because a couple of things happen when women are in the majority. And one of them is that we bring so much knowledge to the table. I was thinking about this just this afternoon because my sister had a baby this year. My best friend in the whole world is pregnant, and our majority leader had her first child the same time my sister had her baby. So that's 3 babies. Another one of my colleagues adopted a baby. Another one of my colleagues' wives gave birth this year. We're kind of having a baby boom in the Nevada Senate. And what I realized about that was in the past, when men were in charge, they might know that all of these babies were born, but I know all about how people chose to have their babies, about the birth control they were using before they got pregnant, about whether they had a midwife or a doula, and whether they gave birth at 40 weeks or 42 weeks or got induced or didn't get induced. And I realize it's because women can have these conversations with each other and understand that they are legitimate and important healthcare questions, whereas not all men, but sometimes men might just know that 3 babies were born and not get the details. And so that becomes really important when this year we passed a bill addressing freestanding birth centers. And NARAL was an important partner for us in understanding the differences, and that's why I brought it up, differences between doulas and midwives and nurses and OB-GYN nurses, and having people with actual experience who have gone through these processes was just, it completely changed the game. It completely changed the conversation. Even if we hadn't been through it ourselves, we knew people who had, and we knew their stories, as opposed to just having conversations that were hypothetical, theoretical, or general about having a baby as opposed to having a baby in a particular location. This one was about birth centers, ensuring that women who go to a birth center can be assured that it meets certain standards of medical professionalism and safety, because we were concerned that there are places in the United States that birth centers, freestanding birth centers, are being created that don't meet certain medical standards, and women don't realize that. And we want women to have choices where they have babies and how they have babies. We absolutely want them to have a choice, but we don't want women to be tricked into believing that they're going to a group of licensed midwives or licensed doulas or nurses practicing under a doctor when they're actually going to a group that is unlicensed and not under the supervision of a doctor, which is also a choice they can make, but we want those to be informed choices. So I think that having women in the majority has been incredibly helpful for those reasons. And then, as you mentioned, we have groups like NARAL who really help us to gather the data that mirrors the experience that we've had to say that, we do know not just statistics, but we know the science, we know the policy measures that have been successful and unsuccessful in other states to help us understand how we can best create policy as Nevadans.
Thank you. And yes, I agree. We need to get some more majority female legislatures everywhere. Would love to have so many more. And Assemblywoman Carrillo, you spoke a little earlier about this, but would love for you to talk more in detail. For the last several years, you've championed this effort to provide reparations to survivors of forced and involuntary sterilization under California's eugenics laws and in California state prisons. This year, you finally achieved your goal. Congratulations. And would love for you to tell us about what led you to work on this issue, the challenges that you face even in a blue state like California, and how you built a successful coalition to achieve this incredible victory.
So thank you for the question, and I'd love to share a little bit more. I can talk about it for hours, but I know our time is limited. So let me just say that this first came to my radar as a college student way back in 2002, 2003. I was taking Chicano studies courses at Cal State Los Angeles, and I learned about the case right in my own backyard where immigrant Mexican women who did not speak English were having babies or having a child at LA County Hospital in the late 1960s. And they would go and have a baby and were never able to get pregnant ever again. And what was discovered was that they were being unknowingly sterilized without their consent. There's a wonderful documentary called No Más Bebés, No More Babies, which talks about the court case in which this all came to light in terms of how these women were treated just based on California eugenics laws. In addition to that, there was an audit that came out sometime in 2014 that also talked about the practice of eugenics and forced sterilization within California prison systems. There was an apology done by former governor, and it was recognized, but it took additional legislation for that to not be the case again. And so it's been continuously ongoing, in which California looked very different than what it looks now. In fact, the eugenics laws were repealed in late 1979. But the practice actually took place up until 2010. And so I'm sorry, I'm getting the date of the audit confused, but up until 2010, this actually took place right here in California. And, it's just something that has been ongoing, the treatment of women, mostly women of color, whether it's, through a hospital system or through a state system, in which this was normalized and it was okay. And it wasn't 2010 isn't that long ago. And so you had women that were incarcerated that this happened to them unknowingly. And so I'm starting my 4th year in office, and this has been something that we have been pushing and championing since I got until I got into office. Because it's personal. We're talking about women from my own community who are elderly, who are dying because of age, who were never able to have children. We're talking about peers, women my own age, who were incarcerated, who have been rehabilitated and able to join society, only to find out that they're not able to ever have a family because this happened to them while incarcerated. And so it's an egregious act of injustice that happened in California. California looks very different now. Our legislature is 100% Democrats in the Assembly, Democrats in the Senate. We have a Democratic governor. Part of the challenge that this issue has often faced has been funding. So in many ways, having now done this through the budget and having negotiated the circumstances around it and how we will approach the new forced sterilization compensation fund for survivors has been a conversation really of the value within our budget. And I'm grateful to have an incredible group of coalition and supporters and legislators, bipartisan support. And one of the things that I had said when I first presented the issue many years ago was that a woman's right to choose includes the right to be a mom, and that no state institution has the authority to take that away from you without consent. And so that brought on a bipartisan coalition, knowingly recognizing that what was happening inside California institutions up until 2010 was wrong and unjust. And no amount of money will ever make it right. But in an effort to create reparations for sterilization or unknown sterilization across the state, we are creating an avenue and a pathway for recognition beyond the apology, with a monetary compensation. And no amount of money, like I mentioned, will ever make it right. But there is something significant about receiving something that says, we know you were wrong. We know that it was wrong what happened to you. And this is an effort in which California is trying to correct so many of the injustices of the past. It has taken quite some time and several pieces of legislation to move this forward by many of my predecessors. But now, finally, we have moved forward with putting in the budget $7.5 million towards the compensation fund, which will identify survivors as well as place markers and monuments in places in California institutions where this took place, because we need a physical reminder, a plaque that reads, this happened here, and we will not allow for this to ever happen again. And unfortunately, California, as I mentioned in my beginning, did lead the way in eugenics laws, most of which impacted poor folks, people with disabilities, women of color. It also impacted men who were in our prison system as well, and in institutions across the state. And so comprehensive reproductive freedom includes addressing the egregious injustices of the past. And I'm just really thankful that we did not give up, that we persevered. And what I told my team, and I think for the legislators on the call, is that there are some fights worth fighting that will take time. And for those of you that are watching, a good fight, it is worth the length of time to build and to organize the coalition around it, to really fight for justice and to correct a wrong of the past. And so this is only the beginning. It's only the first step. We may have additional survivors that identify themselves and come forward. And so I'm grateful that at least with this legislature and with our governor, we were able to move this forward, get it signed, establish the policy, and now move forward, establish the compensation fund, which will address some of these concerns and will certainly be able to provide reparations for survivors for the first time ever.
Wow. Well, I know I can speak for everyone on this call that we are so grateful for your leadership on this issue and for your tireless work to get that accomplished. So thank you. And Representative Clark, your state saw this same issue when just last year it was made public that an ICE detention center in Georgia was performing forced sterilizations on the women being detained there. And now, since the news has been made public, there have been some concerted efforts to combat and stop sterilizations, but just underscores how crucial it is for us to all continue to work to end this practice. And I'd like to talk a little bit with you about Georgia now. Although Georgia saw some incredible election results for reproductive freedom in 2020, right now you're serving in a legislature where the majority has been incredibly hostile towards reproductive freedom. I'd love for you to talk just a little bit about what it means to be a reproductive freedom champion in a state that requires leaders like yourself to play more defense than offense when it comes to protecting access to abortion care.
Thank you so much for that question. And I want to start by reiterating what I said earlier in my introduction. Reproductive health is health. And so that is a message that needs to resonate no matter what side of the aisle a person is on. We need to treat reproductive health not as this, superfluous thing that should be subjected to different regulation than any other part of the body, but as a part of our whole body, our whole selves. But here in Georgia, that is an uphill battle. And yes, we are constantly playing defense. And it can be exhausting. I mean, I will not sugarcoat that at all. Living in a state where you can all but guarantee that there will be one and possibly 2, 3, or 4 bills that directly attack women's bodies, reproductive health, bodily autonomy in some way. It's an exhausting, way to have to work. However, in any game, say soccer, basketball, baseball, whatever game we're playing, in any game, there are going to be people playing offense and there are going to be people playing defense. And what we have to do in a state where defense is what we are having to do, we're having to constantly defend reproductive rights, is we've got to play with the same energy and ferocity that the other side is playing offense. We cannot back down. We cannot give up. I love what the panelist before me said just now when she said that sometimes these things take a long time. You've got to be in it for the long haul and understand that every now and then you're going to get losses. And sometimes it feels like you lose more than you win. But every now and then you get a win too. And those wins matter, no matter how small they are. And those wins eventually pile up. And this is something that I feel like as long as there is reproduction, we are probably going to have to fight for reproductive rights. I do not want that to be true. I do not wish that to be true, but we need to be prepared for that to be true. So we have to understand that when we are fighting for reproductive rights, we are fighting for rights. When we are fighting for reproductive justice, we are fighting for justice. When we are fighting for reproductive health, we are fighting for health. And therefore, we need to fight and we need to just push forward and continue to do everything that we need to do in order to win any battle that we can possibly win. And that expands beyond just fighting against specific bills. That also includes showing up to elections and making sure that the people who we are electing into office have reproductive justice at the front of their mind and on the front of their platforms. They need to be vocally in support of reproductive rights. That should not be something that they say in the shadows. That should not be something that they feel like they have to whisper. We need people in place that understand or at least want to understand just how important reproductive justice is for everyone, not just women. It's for everyone. It is justice, and that's going to be very important. So right now, here in Georgia, we have an attorney general that has joined other attorney generals across the country to just blatantly and directly go up against Roe v. Wade. Like they just filed a brief that says Roe v. Wade is unconstitutional. We're not even sugarcoating it anymore. We're not doing this in a roundabout way. We're not even trying to pretend. We just want to overturn Roe v. Wade. We're asking the Supreme Court to do this. And but we also have elections coming up. And there are people running against this attorney general who, frankly, has not been a champion for reproductive health. He's not been a champion for health at all. Like he was also on the brief that tried to get rid of ACA. So, you know, when we talk about these things, we really need to get candidates in place that will be on our side, on the side of reproductive justice.
Well, thank you. And I know we are all looking forward to being out there helping to flip the Georgia legislature and start playing some offense with you after this next election. Now, our Activist Summit serves as a bridge between educating our members on how the fight to protect access to abortion care continues to evolve across the country and ways they can actively engage in the work at the state and local levels. So I'd love if you can each share the ways that our members can support champions like yourselves and to stay involved. Representative Clark, we'll start with you.
So, as I just said, I think it's really important that we really pay attention to elections and pay attention to the people who are on the ballot. I would love for Georgia to look a little bit more like Nevada. That would be amazing. Um, I think it is also amazing to have science candidates on the ballot, and hopefully, we get science candidates in office, candidates who care about the important things like justice, reproductive justice, and who are open and willing to listen instead of coming in with an agenda that is extremist and frankly harmful to many of their constituency. And then, I can't leave without saying that, yes, running or reproductive health, reproductive justice is something that takes money because those candidates also need money. So for those who have it, the ability to support those candidates as they run for office is also equally as important. But if you do not necessarily have the funds, your activism is equally as important. I know sometimes people feel like the marches and the petitions and the protests are performative and they don't really actually know if they make a difference. But I'm here to tell you, they actually do make a difference. Um, you know, it may seem incremental, but the difference is there. And so your voice is actually really powerful. Your voice at the ballot box is powerful, but your voice between elections is powerful as well. And so we need people to support in whatever way they can, whether that be through their time, their talent, or their treasure. All of those things are very important to getting to where we need to get to so that we're not constantly playing defense as we are in Georgia.
Thank you. That's great advice. And Senator Scheibel, what advice do you have for our members?
Get out there and do the work. Support candidates who support reproductive justice and reproductive freedom. And I think the best thing you can do is walk and knock on doors for candidates that you believe in and candidates who you want to get reelected. And then when the election season is over, keep volunteering, either with that candidate or with community organizations that support reproductive justice. Because, I think that we like to tell people to be activists, not slacktivists, because sharing things on Facebook is great and retweeting things is great. But when the rubber hits the road and I'm at the legislature and I need to know really quick what's going on the ground at the Rape Crisis Center and whether or not they are getting the funding that they need, I'm not going to Facebook. I'm calling that volunteer who knocked on doors with me on a Saturday morning, who continues to volunteer at the Rape Crisis Center because I know him or her or them, and I call them up and say, hey, can I talk to the director of Rape Crisis Center? And so I think that it's really important that everybody recognize that none of us are above knocking on doors. None of us are above making phone calls as candidates. It's what I do every single weekend for my campaign. And so, be willing to roll up your sleeves and knock on doors, make those phone calls, and then continue the work. It's not just during election season. It's whether it's a candidate who's in office and asks you to come out and help set up tables for a barbecue, or it is a community organization that says, hey, we're going to have these candidates here. Will you help us check people in at the door? Be willing to continue to do that work throughout the year and throughout the cycle, because it's the support that candidates need. And also, I'll be frank, that's also how you're going to advance in politics as well. I imagine that we have a lot of people here listening in who want to run for office one day. And, if people who currently hold office know your name, know your face, know that you show up, that's going to go a lot farther than anything you can put on your resume, any leadership program, any degrees that you might have. It's going to go a lot farther than that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll say it one more time for the people in the back there. The work doesn't end on election day. It's only gets started. So it's important that we continue working and not that we necessarily have to with the three that we have here, but it's important to hold legislators accountable once we get them elected to the promises that they made on the campaign trail. Okay, and then last but not least, Assemblywoman Carrillo, what advice do you have for our members?
Well, I would echo the words by Representative Clark and Senator Scheibel as well. I also think it's important that we recognize the work being done on intersectionality work. So, for example, I just want to bring into the space Nurse Dawn Wooten, who was the whistleblower in Georgia, who actually was working in an ICE detention facility when she was the one that actually brought to light the forced sterilizations of immigrant women being held at the ICE detention facility in Georgia. And what that means, the importance of that, and being able to support those efforts. In California, the Latino Legislative Caucus actually raised funds and worked with organizations on the ground in Georgia, with Latino-focused organizations in Georgia, to bring the Latino electorate out to vote to flip Georgia to blue. And so when we think about raising funds and what those funds go to, they go to different causes. And so for us in California, being able to assist the efforts of Georgia was incredibly important, and also increasing the electorate, because we know at the end of the day, those in power make choices over our bodies, over women's bodies specifically, and women of color specifically. I was at Standing Rock, North Dakota, in the fight against the North Dakota Access Pipeline, when I made friends with nurses on the ground and with folks on the ground who, and because I had a car, had asked me, can you go into the city and see if we can find Plan Bs? Because people were still getting busy, right? And maybe didn't have the protections. And so I'm in North Dakota. I'd never been there before. And I leave the reservation and I go into Bismarck, into the city, only to find out that it was incredibly difficult to go to even a store, like a drugstore, to get a Plan B. There are no Planned Parenthoods. There are no clinics that offer reproductive health care. And the closest Planned Parenthood as a clinic that was near the area was in a different state, in Montana. I had no idea. I come from a very, democratic state in California, and learned for the first time in a very real way how difficult it would be for a woman to have access to an abortion, to have access to Plan B, to have access to comprehensive reproductive health care in the state of North Dakota, and how she would have to have traveled, or the couple would have to have traveled to a different state to access. And so I would say that while in California and in other states we have led the way in many ways and are continuing to build movements, we also have a responsibility. And for those of you, all the activists in this activist summit on this call, on the Zoom, to focus on states in which that's not the reality. There is a national conversation that is taking place, absolutely, but how we build power, how we build the bench, how we elect leaders that are reproductive justice leaders in states where we potentially may not be focused on is critical, because it's the state legislators, especially what Representative Clark shared, that are introducing legislation at the state level, not at the national level, but at the state level, that is creating harmful situations for so many people and so many families, to be quite honest, when it comes to reproductive health care. And so we need to be vigilant that organizations not only support congressional candidates on the federal level, but that we are really looking at the state bench. What does your local state legislature look like? And what are the things that they're focusing on? And are they creating laws that are to create more equity, or are they actually trying to take away some of the rights that have been fought for so many years? And so I think that's the takeaway that I would have, because even in California, we're advancing. I was a co-author of a piece of legislation that allows for access to the birth control after pill, morning after pill on college campuses, which was incredibly difficult to push as well. It took us 2 tries, both on the Senate and the Assembly side, but now became law. Now this piece for eugenics and forced sterilization, creating more access and more equity across the state. And that's just California. But you look at other states where none of that is even available. You can't even go to a clinic. Like, that is a very real, like, reality that women specifically are facing across the nation. And so wherever it is that you're from, wherever it is that you find yourself now, try to figure out a way in which we can expand the base and create state legislatures that are being more productive and progressive in the rights for reproductive health care than the states that are actually trying to take those away, because that's where the fight is.
That's such great advice. Thank you. Well, I want to thank our incredible panelists for joining us this afternoon and for all of the incredible work that you are doing in your states to build power and protect our reproductive freedom. And thanks, of course, to our members for joining us as well this afternoon. So now we will have a 10-minute break before our closing keynote address. So we will see you back here in 10. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.